There are dozens of videos telling you how to get into America's Ivy League. But if you're looking at the European Ivy League, you need a completely different strategy. European universities don't necessarily care about the same things as the American universities do. And in some cases, the things that strengthen your US application can have very little impact on your European application. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how you should approach getting into Europe's most prestigious and selective university for both undergrad and master's programs. Hi, I'm Ameya. I have an MBA from the University of Toronto and I've helped hundreds of students get into 40 of the world's top 100 ranked universities. On this channel, I help students make smarter career and study abroad decisions. So if you haven't already, do subscribe to the channel. It'll be a win-win for the both of us. Before I get into the framework that the European Ivy League uses to evaluate applications, I need to make 4 important disclaimers. First, there's no official European Ivy League. I'm using this term loosely for Europe's most prestigious and selective universities, but if I had to make such a list, I'd pick from the 20 universities on the screen right now. Pause the video if you want to go through them. Second, the admissions criteria vary slightly across European universities, and I can't cover every difference in one video. The core evaluation framework remains the same. So use this framework to build your profile, but always check the specific requirements of your target university. Third, I'll cover both undergrad and master's applications, but not MBA or PhD admissions because those are evaluated quite differently. I'll probably make a separate video on that. And finally, I'll be covering the strategy to get in for postgrad and undergrad applications in 2 different sections of this video. So skip to the part that's relevant to you. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's begin. Let's start with master's admissions because this is where most Indian students looking at Europe are applying. And here's the first thing you need to understand. Getting into Europe's most selective universities is less about building the longest possible resume and more about proving that you are academically prepared for the specific program that you are applying to. There are 8 areas that you need to get right. The first thing universities look at is your undergraduate college and GPA. The top European universities are highly selective. Some of them have acceptance rates below 20% and in some cases below 10%. So attending a strong undergraduate college helps, but the college name alone won't get you in, and you also need strong grades. As a broad benchmark, I'd consider getting a GPA above 8 out of 10 good, 9 out of 10 great, 9.5 or higher. The higher your GPA, the stronger your position. But what if your GPA is below 8? Don't assume you're out. You can strengthen other parts of your profile, but you also can't completely compensate for poor academics. For example, TU Delft has a strict GPA requirement for some programs. So be very careful of anyone promising you a guaranteed admit to a selective European university despite weak academics. And so here we have the first pillar of your master's application strategy. Before worrying about extracurriculars, make sure that your academic profile is strong enough for the universities you're targeting. This is probably the biggest difference between applying to Europe and applying to the US. At many European universities, a master's is expected to build directly on your undergraduate education. This means that your degree and your individual courses need to match the requirements of the program. For example, someone with an economics background might be eligible for a master's in economics or econometrics, but not necessarily computer science or aerospace engineering. And universities get extremely specific. Take TUM's master's in computer science. The eligibility requirements include a detailed list of the undergraduate knowledge applicants are expected to have. You don't meet the minimum requirements, you can get rejected regardless of how strong the rest of your profile is. So before you spend months improving your SOP, doing internships or taking the GRE, check whether you're actually eligible for the program. And what if you don't meet the requirement? Then there are a few European universities offering pre-masters or conversion programs, but these are limited. And in many cases, a pre-masters is designed specifically for the university's own master's program, so switching between universities is possible but not probable. So here's the second pillar of your strategy. Treat eligibility as your first filter. Don't try to build a stronger profile for a program that you don't qualify for. Once you've cleared the GPA and course requirements, the next question is, can you actually do master's level academic research? That's because many European master's programs include a research thesis. So evidence that you've already done serious research can strengthen your application. That could mean research projects, papers, or conference presentations. But don't misunderstand this. Writing papers is not compulsory for every master's program. Some universities simply allow you to submit papers as additional material. For example, ETH Zurich's Quantitative Finance Masters allows applicants to provide additional documents that can strengthen their application. In other cases, research work can be much more important. KU Leuven's Masters in International Politics, for example, requires applicants to submit a research paper. And if you do have a paper, does it need to be published? No. A strong unpublished paper can still demonstrate your research ability, but publication adds credibility to the work that you've done. So the third pillar of your strategy is this. If research is relevant to your program, don't just tell the universities you're interested in research, show them that you've actually done it. Now ask yourself another question. Can you apply what you've learned? That's where projects, internships, and work experience come in. These can strengthen your profile, but generally they matter less than getting your academics, eligibility, and research right. And here's one important rule. Relevance beats quality. If you're applying for a master's in AI/ML, then one internship where you actually use relevant concepts can help much more than 3 internships involving front-end development or software testing. The point is simple. If you do choose to spend time pursuing an internship or a full-time job, make sure that is directly relevant to the program master's that you're applying for. So the fourth pillar of your strategy is this: build evidence that connects your past experience to the master's that you want to study. Here's another major difference from the US. In the US, students often take the GRE because it's a common component of master's application. In Europe, you cannot assume that the GRE is necessary or even useful for every program. Some highly selective universities such as TU Delft and Bocconi require the GRE for certain programs, while other excellent universities such as TCD in Ireland don't. So check program by program if the GRE is required. And if so, take it. And if it's optional or recommended for a highly competitive program, I would still generally recommend taking it because a strong score can strengthen your application. As a benchmark, a score of 325 or higher is the kind of score that can meaningfully strengthen your profile. So the fifth pillar of your strategy is this: don't take the GRE because everyone applying abroad takes it. Take it because your specific program tells you to. Now let's assume that your profile is strong. You still need to answer 2 critical questions. Why this master's and why you? That's where your statement of purpose comes in. In Germany, you may see this called as a letter of motivation, but the basic purpose is similar. Your SOP should generally be around 1 to 2 pages and answer 5 questions. How did you become interested in this field? What do you want to do after graduation? What have you already done towards that goal? What knowledge or skill gap is stopping you from getting there? And how will this specific university and program help you close that skill gap? The strongest SOPs that I've seen usually follow this logic because they create a clear connection between your past, present, and future. And don't try to write it in one sitting. Spend a week or 2 reflecting on your experiences, your goals, why the specific program fits you. Then build the story. So the 6th pillar of your strategy is this: don't use your SOP to repeat your resume. Use it to explain the logic behind your application. Next are your letters of recommendation. Most programs ask for 1 or 2, although requirements may vary. Your first letter of recommendation should be from someone who has observed you in an academic setting, professor, a final year guide, or a research mentor, and who can speak specifically about your strengths as a student. The second recommendation can sometimes come from a professional supervisor, but for many European master's programs, an academic recommender is more valuable unless the professional experience is particularly relevant or impressive. But choosing the right recommender is just half the battle. The actual content of the recommendation matters just as much. Professor saying the student is hardworking or sincere tells the university almost nothing. Professor explaining what they saw when they saw you demonstrate a particular strength, what you did, and the outcome is far more powerful. There is also one strategy that can strengthen your recommendation: working with professors at top universities abroad. For example, you could explore summer research programs at universities such as ETH Zurich or organizations such as the Max Planck Institute, and then request a letter of recommendation from your guide there. These programs have their own eligibility criteria, so do check those carefully before applying. So the 7th part of your strategy is this: don't chase impressive names, chase people who can provide credible, specific evidence of your ability. Finally, some of Europe's most competitive programs use tests and interviews. This isn't universal, but when it happens, you need to take it seriously. And these usually aren't the generic HR-style interviews that you might expect in a job interview. For competitive programs, questions are usually technical and directly related to the course that you're applying to study. So if your program has an interview or an entrance test, don't treat it as a formality. So strategy number 8, and the final piece of your master's application strategy to European universities is this: once you've built your application, prepare specifically for the university selection process, not just for the application itself. Okay, so let's zoom out. What is the big picture? It's this: getting into Europe's most selective master's programs is not about a competition to see who can build the longest resume. Your strategy should be to make sure that you're eligible, then work on your GPA, then demonstrate that you can handle the academic demands through research projects and other relevant experience. Finally, use your applications, namely your SOP and your letters of recommendations, to connect everything into a convincing application. And remember, in Europe, the biggest mistake you can make is spending 6 months strengthening the wrong part of your application. So check the admissions and application requirements before you start building your profile, not after. Now let's talk about undergraduate admission. And if you're applying straight from school, there's one thing I want you to understand immediately. Getting into Europe's most selective universities is not about copying the American college admissions playbook. You don't necessarily need 15 extracurriculars, a long list of leadership positions, and a dozen certificates. At some universities, your grades and an entrance test can determine almost everything, and at others, your essays, activities, and recommendations matter a lot more. So the strategy is simple: understand what your university actually evaluates, and then spend your time becoming excellent at those things. Let's start with the obvious one, your high school grades. For undergraduate admissions, your academic record is usually one of the most important parts of your application, often more important than in countries like the US. In fact, many universities have strict minimum grade requirements, failing which they won't even look at the rest of your application. Typically, this requirement is between 75% to 90%, but to be truly competitive, you should aim for 95% or higher. Apart from the importance of grades, another way in which top European universities differ from American counterparts is that while the US grades for all 4 years in high school are important, that is, grades from 9 to 12th standard are important. For Europe, in most cases, what the universities look for are your 11th and 12th standard grades. And in some cases, universities look at 10th, 11th and 12th grades, such as with Sciences Po or with ETH Zurich in Switzerland. But it's not just the grades, it's also the subjects that you've chosen. Most universities have strict prerequisites that you should have studied in high school. For example, for engineering, most universities require math and physics in high school. For economics, it's math and English. So the subject combination is as important as the grades themselves. So here's the first piece of strategy for you. Before anything else, make sure that you have the right grades and subjects chosen in high school. You don't just want to choose the right subjects and get the best grades. You should also take the hardest courses that your high school offers, at least in those subjects directly relevant to your intended college major. For IB students, this means choosing the right HL subjects. For A-level students, it means gunning for that AICE diploma. And for Indian board students, it means taking 3 to 4 relevant AP exams. So the second piece of strategy is this. Take the hardest possible courses in high school to prove that you can deal with academic rigor. When applying to the American Ivy League, applicants take the SAT or ACT by default, but these tests aren't mandatory requirement for most European universities. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you shouldn't take the SAT or ACT, just that you should check if your university actually requires or recommends those before you decide to spend time and energy preparing for either of these tests. For example, Bocconi in Italy and the KIT Karl Benz School in Germany both either require the SAT or their own entrance exam for admissions. However, École Polytechnique in France, which is equally selective and prestigious, does not. And often the same university might have 2 different testing requirements depending on the major that you're applying to. The point is simple. Check if your target universities actually require the SAT or ACT or some other standardized test before you start studying. If they require it or recommend it, aim for a 1500 plus on the SAT or a 34 or higher on ACT to improve your chances of an admit. So the third piece of your strategy is this. Check testing requirements in grade 11 itself to avoid last minute rush of preparing for your standardized test. So far, we've looked at subjects, grades, and test scores. All of these speak to your academic potential and aptitude, but can you actually apply what you've learned? And can you design, research, or build stuff based on what you've learned? All of that is judged through your co-curriculars. Now, co-curriculars are basically anything that is related to the college major that you want to pursue, but those activities which don't contribute directly to your high school grades. So these could be things like a research paper, a project you've built, or relevant internships. Universities have several ways of evaluating this. Sometimes they ask you to include your co-curricular achievements in a specific part of the application. Sometimes they ask you to include this in your resume, and sometimes they'll just have a section for additional documents where you can add these. Co-curriculars are a powerful way for you to differentiate yourself from other applicants because at most top-tier European universities, the number of qualified applicants in terms of grades and test scores still is much higher than the number of available places. The most important thing to note though is that the co-curriculars must be directly related to the major that you want to pursue. So building an app that gets 1 million downloads on the Play Store is effective for someone who's planning to apply for computer science, but not that relevant for someone planning to apply for law. Unless, of course, the app itself is related to law. So here's your strategy pillar number 4. Work only on relevant co-curriculars with tangible impact when applying to European universities. Extracurriculars are activities that you do outside of your major. It could be things like sports, music, hobbies, or anything else. These are usually less important for European college applications. The biggest mistake I see high school students do is spending too much time and energy on extracurricular activities, even though European universities honestly don't care much about them. Now, am I saying that you should go full nerd and not have any extracurriculars? Absolutely not. What I am saying though is that they matter far less than they do for the USA. And even when they do matter, it's more in an indirect way where the university might ask about those hobbies or extracurriculars casually in an application form, or it may just come up in an interview. But don't be dejected because this is a good thing. It means that you can truly just do those activities that you really enjoy and that you don't have to live up to unrealistic standards of extracurricular involvement or do things that you don't enjoy just to look good on a paper. So the fifth pillar of your strategy is this. Eliminate extracurriculars to make time for other profile building activities. This is another area where European universities differ a lot from American universities, and where the differences between European universities itself is quite large. When applicants apply to selective American universities, they usually are used to writing 3 to 4 essays in most cases. And many of these essays are about the applicants and their life story, or about their background, or about their community. But European university essays are different. First, most universities require just one essay. Take for example Trinity College Dublin, which is #1 in Ireland. It requires just one personal statement. Second, the essays for Europe tend to be far more direct than the essays for American universities. Most essays are just 1 to 2 pages long, and you're only supposed to explain why you're applying to that major at that particular university in the context of your career goals. So this means that essay writing for most European universities requires less effort than it does for American universities. At the same time though, applicants are expected to have more detailed understanding of their career goals and how the university's courses and other resources can directly help them achieve those goals. Now, what I just mentioned about essays covers most of the universities, but for a few universities like Sciences Po, you still need to write multiple essays. So check the requirements carefully. Now, how important are essays? Turns out quite important. Most universities don't share the exact weightage that they assign to essays, but some universities like Erasmus do. In the case of the International Business Administration program, they specifically mention a 25% weightage to essays. But at any rate, you should take essays seriously, given that most universities require at least one. So here's the sixth piece of your strategy. Spend 2 to 3 weeks figuring out the details of your long-term career goals and how the university and program you're applying to will help you achieve that goal. Top-ranked European universities need to know that if you're admitted, you'll be a net positive on campus. They judge whether you will be one based on the letters of recommendation that you provide. Don't assume that all programs require a letter of recommendation. In fact, many like TU Dev don't, but those that do require usually 1 or 2. So my advice here is to be prepared for any case. Take one from your high school counselor and one from a subject teacher who taught you a course relevant to the college major that you wish to study. Now, the high school counselor should write about your general strengths as a student, your attitude towards academics, and towards your teachers and peers. The subject teacher, on the other hand, should write about your specific academic strengths. You can take a third letter of recommendation from any other subject teacher or from a supervisor at an internship if that internship was related to your major. But in all cases, all claims about your strengths made by the recommender should be backed by anecdotes. So here's the seventh piece of your strategy. Identify relevant recommenders early and explain the strengths and skills that you want them to write about in your recommendation. The final pillar of your strategy to apply to European universities is to study hard for their tests and interviews. Several selective European universities conduct entrance exams and interviews, and in many cases, failure to qualify in these means a certain reject. Take, for example, the TU Dev Bachelors in Aerospace Engineering program. They conduct an online technical test, failing which you don't get an admission into the program, no matter how strong the rest of your profile is. And these tests aren't easy. For the most part, they test college level concepts, and secondly, they're quite selective. In TU Dev's case, anywhere between 3,000 to 3,500 applicants take the test, and only about 440 are selected. That's a 12 to 14% selection rate. Now, do you always need to take an entrance test? No, it depends on how competitive the program is. So generally, entrance tests are required by the most selective universities for those majors that see the highest number of applicant volumes. It also depends on your own high school performance and the rigor of the courses that you took in high school. For example, when you're applying to ETH Zurich, IB students who score above 38 on 42 don't have to take the entrance exam, but those who score below 38 do. Similarly, applicants from Indian boards need to take the test in all cases at ETH Zurich. So checking the admissions requirements carefully is the name of the game here. Now, if you do have to take an entrance test, don't worry. In most cases, the universities do provide you with a syllabus and prep material as well, and you do get a month or 2 to study. So here's the final piece of your strategy when applying to European universities. Find out in advance whether your target universities require entrance tests and set aside 2 months to prepare. So what's the most important thing to know when it comes to your application strategy for bachelor's programs in Europe? It's to recognize that European admissions work very differently from American admissions. In particular, European universities focus much more on academics, their own tests, and co-curricular activities. They focus less on extracurriculars, so build your profile accordingly. Okay, so one thing I didn't talk about in the whole video is about language tests. Why? Because the expectations of universities both at the undergrad and master's programs is the same. For both kinds of programs, a score of 7 or higher on the IELTS will make you eligible for all universities, all programs that teach in English. A score of 6.5 will make you eligible for 90% of the programs. A score of 6 makes you eligible for 80% of the programs, and below 6, you have relatively few options that you can apply to. Note though that in certain cases, you can waive the language test if your schooling or undergrad was done in an English-speaking country, or if your entire course in school or college was in English. But you need to check each university's websites separately because the requirements differ from university to university and frankly program to program. And when it comes to the local language proficiency, you only need to prove that if the university requires it. This generally is the case when your program itself is taught in the local language. In such cases, universities generally require a C1 or sometimes a B2 level proficiency. Now, if your program is taught in English, learning the local language and taking those certification exams can still help because it signals to the university that you're really interested in studying there. However, this is less important than the other points that we've discussed. That's it for our video on getting into the best European university. If you have any questions about your profile or about the study abroad process in general, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.